Hello and welcome to another episode of Crystal Cast. My name is Ross.
My name is Juan.
Good. Hello and welcome to another episode of Crystal Cast. My name is Ross and I'm an immigration lawyer.
My name is Juan and I'm a registered immigration agent.
Juan, good to see you. We've got quite a lot to cover today. It's actually one of the episodes that I've been looking forward to, and that is the federal budget. And the reason why that's important, look, there's obviously what we're covering today is the immigration side of things. But the federal budget is important in a number of ways because it essentially shapes what immigration is going to look like for the next 12 months in the new financial year. So whether you are a migration agent, a lawyer, whether you are a client or a visa applicant, you know, it impacts everyone. So, you know, I think this is, out of all the topics that we cover, I feel like this is probably the most important one that we're going to cover because we're now talking about what's going to happen next 12 months.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So we obviously, just to keep things in the context as well, the budget has been released recently, and you know there is I know that there's people that are publishing information already online, which is good. So I think it's important to also just keep in mind that the way that we're going to talk about the budget is on a high level perspective. So we're not going to sort of go into a deeper dive in terms of how things will work in practice. And I think it's not actually possible when you don't have the regulations.
Right.
So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the main things that have jumped out so that we can help our audience to understand how that's going to impact them.
Speaking about the similarities in between last year's federal budget and this year's, there is a heavy focus on the budget in this year's. There is a heavy focus on skilled migration. I think that the government is keeping that priority on top of everything, and you know, like trying to bring skills to Australia, like skilled people, and enriching the country in that sense.
Yeah, I definitely would have to agree with you. I think for me personally, that hasn't sort of come as a surprise. That it was going to be very skilled focused. So when I saw the split, I think it was 72% was going to be skilled migration, and then the rest was going to be family. That wasn't sort of a shock, and I don't think it was a shock for anyone else because at the end of the day, we still have, you know, COVID-19 recovery that's happening. So skilled migration is definitely a heavy topic. And I just sort of thought as well, Juan, just going back to the training visas, I actually think that there's going to be quite a big influx of training visa refusals. And I know you sort of asked why I think that's the case. Well, if you think about it, so think of it this way. You've got someone who is now qualified for a TSS visa. So you need that 1 year, correct? So if you've got 1 year of experience, then why aren't you lodging a TSS visa?
Oh yeah, of course.
So I do think that it's going to be, I think employers will now need to be a little bit more vigilant with their training plan. And look, at the end of the day, I think the term enhanced skills, it's a bit of a sort of airy-fairy term in terms of, you know, one can put anything in there really, but I think employers will now really need to justify what skills they are enhancing.
Yeah, and I suppose we also have the registration stream. So I guess like that one is gonna remain. Sort of the same.
Yeah. So that's true. Look, I think, and that's a good point. So registration that will remain because if you think of condition 8607, you can't work on the TSS visa without the registration. So that will remain. The exchange stream will remain as well. I think, but they're the streams that aren't really used that much. So I think it's the occupational trainee stream that's going to be really scrutinized because if you think about it, the cost of the TSS visa, it's double by comparison to by comparison to the training visa. The other thing that comes to mind is I know everyone's asking where will this skills and demand visa going to come into effect. So if you're going to have a date that says from November, the requirement of a TSS visa is going to go down to 1 year, then that obviously confirms in a way, and obviously don't quote me because I'm just quoting from what's in the budget, but that confirms that it's not going to come into effect on 1 July. So I think, and which sort of makes sense because look, at the end of the day, the government's still doing consultations with in regards to the different occupation list.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're going to get skills and demand visa. We might get the regulations in December, but in reality, I don't think it'll be out this year.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah,
you've got a specific
yeah.
date now that
Mm.
says that the requirement for TSS visa will be 1 year in November. So
Yeah.
that sort of, you've got to read. Sometimes with things like budget, you've got to read between the lines in terms of what it's saying. So for those of you who are thinking that skills and demand visa will come into play on 1 July, based on the announcements that were made last night, it doesn't look like it will come into effect on 1 July.
So when you roster what's going to be a cessation of the Business Innovation and Investment Program,
Yeah.
but it's interesting they announced that they're going to be offering refunds to those people withdrawing from September the application.
Yeah, well, for me, it's a bit of like a deja vu, to be honest, because back in the day, in 2012, when in 2012 when general skill migration rules have changed, because there were too many application lodged in the pipeline, they were doing the same thing as well. They've announced that there was going to be an overhaul of general skill migration. That's when the expression of interest was introduced, and they've offered refunds to those individuals who have lodged their applications. But where I'm going with this is that if the department is offering refunds, basically what this means is that there's that many applications on hand that it's probably not going to be possible for them to even get through the next financial year. So that's kind of painting, again, with the budget, you need to read between the lines in terms of what's being said. So if the government's saying, we're happy for you to withdraw the application, we'll give you a refund, that's saying there are so many applications in the pipeline that even if we were to take up 24 and 25 as the financial year, we're still not going to get through all of the applications that are in the pipeline.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
So I think it'll definitely impact. Look, with business innovation visa, I think the idea of it was good. It certainly had a particular purpose, but look, purpose versus execution, they're two very different things. And I think what has happened with this particular program is that it's just became a little bit too loose in terms of the requirements to move from a temporary visa to a permanent visa. Just very sort of narrow amount of days that you would need to spend in Australia, the types of investments that you need to make. So some people might disagree, but I think it's a good thing that business innovation visa is being phased out, because I think it is a visa that's not working. That's my opinion on the situation. What do you think?
No, yeah, it's true. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And speaking about, I must say one of my favorite visas in the past, like the Global Talent Visa.
Yeah.
I've always thought of this like such a interesting visa, giving the opportunity to the talents of the world.
Yeah, and we've done a few. So
we've done a few.
We've been able to see sort of different industries and everything.
Yeah, and I liked it. It was actually my first big submission. I remember what case I'm talking about.
Yes,
a big
I do.
submission for this person that ended up getting the visa. But now there are, speaking about this National Innovation Visa, which is going to be potentially replacing the Global Talent. And again, this speaks about innovation. Do you think that the distinguished challenge, like for people in the fields of sport and art are going to be taken out altogether from this?
Interesting question. Gosh, I feel like a bit of a historian today because I had to go back in time and explain how it worked. Because in the before time, in the dinosaur age, you had what was called a distinguished talent visa. You still have it. So you don't really need an invitation to get the 858 visa. And we've actually done distinguished talent visas in our firm. But there's very few places that are reserved for it. I think it's like 300 per year. So that's why the global talent visa was introduced. So the whole point was that let's place people in sort of, 10 different categories or 12 different categories, so that way if they fit the criteria, the visa could then be granted. So I think with this new talent innovation visa, no, I don't think it's going to take out sports and arts. In fact, I think it'll probably attract that even more. Because if you, there's a program that's being run, and I apologize to anyone who's in Victoria now if I get this wrong, but there is a program that's being run at the moment about attracting more arts into Victoria and sort of running a project that they're planning to launch. So I do think it's actually going to go, hand in hand with that. So I actually do think that it's going to potentially be a little bit more broader. Again, I think it's really difficult to talk about something when there's no regulations. But what I have seen that's been happening with Global Talent Visa, and I say this to clients, I say this during my CPDs. Look, I think you can be good at your job. You can be very good at your job, but the purpose of global talent and the key focus here is talent, is having some sort of exceptional ability to do something, and on top of that being transferable. So for example, having a skill that you can't transfer, it's not considered to be a talent that's attractive for immigration, but also having that talent recognized within the industry. And that's quite a high threshold. So we have a lot of individuals that come to us and say, I do X, Y, Z. I don't want to go into people that we've said no to, in case they're listening. But they might say, I do X, Y, Z, and we say, well, I can see that you're talented because you've done this sort of project, you've done that sort of project, but you're talking about a global talent. So I think this innovation visa, I think it will still keep the elements of the business visa, because it's business innovation visa, and it's going to keep the global talent visa. So in a way, it will kind of marry the two. And again, look, it's going to be interesting to see how it's going to work in practice when the regulations come out. But I actually think that this is probably a good move. It's going to be able to, it's going to be easy to change this visa. So for example, if it's not working, we can just release a new instrument to say, well, maybe we should change the criteria to this or that. So rather than having a new subclass, you've got a very broad visa, and then you can just release instruments and sort of adapt it accordingly. So I think that's a good thing.
Ep13, this MACE program, which stands for Mobility Arrangement for Talented Early Professional Scheme, aimed and targeted for Indian nationals. And it's really nice, but probably it's going to be, in the form of stream for the 408 visas.
Yeah, look, I don't think they'll probably create a new visa, a new mates visa, so to speak. I think that's just a bit too complicated and probably even unnecessary. It's a bit like, for example, the common misconception when we say the COVID visa. Well, it wasn't really a COVID visa; it was a 408 visa in the endorsed event stream. So, but I do think it's a great initiative. I hope they do it for more countries, because it's a nice sort of well, not necessarily an exchange program because it's not really an exchange, but I think it's a way to attract skilled migrants who might not have thought about coming to Australia before.
Yeah.
You know, because I think with Australia we do have this pattern where we have individuals that come here on a student visa, then they stay on the 485, and then they sort of remain. But this is kind of aimed more for individuals that they haven't thought about Australia as a destination. So again, I think that's a really smart move by the government, definitely, because it's targeting a market that would not necessarily look at a visa to Australia.
And it is for 2 years, so
Yeah,
it's really good.
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, Ross, this is a summary. There is a lot to digest
Yeah,
on all that has been announced in the budget, and I guess we're going to be covering with more details. More.
yeah, definitely. Look, there'll definitely be information sessions for visa applicants. We'll do CPDs for migration professionals as well. And I think what's important is when it comes to the these are announcements, so that's very important to remember. So, what's important to keep in mind is that there needs to be legislation behind it. You also need to see, I suppose, the practical aspect of how it's going to work. So once all that information becomes available, obviously we'll cover it. But overall, I do think it's a win for immigration. I think it's definitely heading in the right direction. You know, sometimes I read the budget and I think, you know, what were they sort of thinking the night before when it was released? But I definitely do think that the areas that we're addressing, you know, skills shortage and things like that, it is there. Look, at the end of the day, there'll always be people who will say, well, we should allocate more or we should do this. That's the reality. You're not going to please everyone, but I think if you look at a bigger picture, overall, most people are winners in this budget. So it is going to be it's going to be a challenging year ahead, but it's definitely going to be a very engaging year for both professionals and also visa applicants.